Justice Harry Blackmun, in 1994, said this, and I'm thinking everybody's familiar with this. "From this day forward, I shall no longer tinker with the machinery of death." I'm optimistic that the effort to eliminate arbitrariness while preserving fairness in the infliction of death is so plainly doomed to failure that it and the death penalty must be abandoned altogether. The path, in this case, speaking for the court, the path the court has chosen lessens us all. You know, what we learn, and especially as we get on in years and watch this cycle repeat itself, is that we learn that revenge is never sweet. The death penalty will never bring relief. It will never effectively bring closure. And when we watch chillingly how it happens, how the machinery of the execution, the machinery of death, is influenced by serendipity and happenstance, we're appalled. We're human beings. We're better than that. Governor Rell should recognize that about us, that the consequence of this is it is a law that doesn't work, it doesn't do what it purports to do, and it ruins us, it lessens us as human beings. She should sign this bill, contrary to her stated position. The state of Connecticut has no business being in the business of killing people.
The bipartisan votes in the House and Senate this month abolishing the death penalty represent the will of the people of Connecticut. It is now time for Governor Rell to put aside her personal feelings and preferences and to sign Ray's Bill 6578, thus acknowledging that our standards of decency have changed and that justice is no longer measured by whether a life is taken or spared. As a statewide organization of criminal defense attorneys, a group uniquely situated to identify the gross shortcomings of capital punishment, we, CCDLA, call upon Governor Rell to sign this historic measure, enabling Connecticut to join Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, New York, and New Jersey as Northeast corridor states that have given up the use of capital punishment. Citing the anguish and outrage of victims' families, Governor Rell said last week that there are certain crimes so heinous that the death penalty is warranted. Putting aside the problem of identifying and prosecuting these heinous crimes in an even-handed way, Governor Rell's statement is an endorsement of vengeance. It may be wrapped in the mantle of retribution, but it is still an endorsement of vengeance. And in the words of the late Thurgood Marshall, vengeance and retaliation is an intolerable aspiration for a government in a free society.
More than 2/3 of the world's countries have abolished the death penalty in law or in practice. Indeed, the worldwide trend is toward abolition. In 2008, the United States, however, had the dishonorable distinction of keeping company with China, Pakistan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia in carrying out 93% of the world's executions. 35 American states have a death penalty, with Connecticut sadly among them, until perhaps now. With the historic passage of House Bill 6578 to repeal Connecticut's unworkable death penalty, we have the opportunity to lead the nation, along with New Jersey, New York, and New Mexico, who also recently abolished their death penalties, and to join the momentum worldwide toward a more humane and evolved system of justice. Governor Jody Rell alone potentially stands in the way of this bill becoming law. Our call, thus, is to you, Governor. Do not perpetuate Connecticut's failed death penalty. It serves no legitimate purpose. It wreaks havoc on the victims with false promises of closure and healing that never come. It costs the taxpayers mightily for not expending resources so desperately needed elsewhere. As our clients attest, it fails to deter crime, and it offers no greater public safety than sentences of life in prison without the possibility of release. Connecticut's death penalty denigrates our judicial system, and instead of offering justice, Governor, it makes a mockery of it. Connecticut has made national news with its historic vote to repeal the death penalty, drawing the attention of many organizations and individuals committed to the cause of abolition, including one of its most famous advocates, Sister Helen Prejean. Humbly, I introduce to you Sister Helen, who brought this issue most publicly to the fore in her New York Times bestseller, Pulitzer Prize-nominated book, Dead Man Walking. She is dedicated to educating the public about the death penalty and is the founder of Survive, a victims advocacy group in New Orleans. She has spent years counseling not only inmates on death row, but importantly, the families of murder victims as well. And she is here, Governor, via teleconference from Iowa, to talk to you.
Glad to be a part of this and to add my voice to the voice of the legislators in there in Connecticut who have done such a historic vote. And of course, all the crunch issues that are in this vote and that led the legislators finally to do this. Just looking at the record, and that Connecticut is certainly not a state that you can call enthusiastic about the death penalty. I come from down in the death penalty belt in Louisiana and Mississippi and Texas, where we really do the death penalty. You know, we've been at it over 30 years. And if you look at the track record, if you look at who does it, 80% of all executions since it was put back in 76, 80% have been done in the 10 southern states that practice slavery and that have the harshest penal system. And of course, it's steeped in racism to keep people of color under control and to have the harshest punishments for crime. Connecticut is part of the Northeast pattern, where less than 1% of all your executions have taken place. And I happen to know a little bit personally about Connecticut because I visited with Michael Ross, the one person who has been executed in 60-something years in your state. And he was a very, very conflicted and I think mentally disturbed young man. Found out that he had gone and tried twice to commit suicide. He would go to the river and think of jumping because he had, like he put it, this beast inside of him that made him kill women. So it was his decision to end his life, in which Connecticut finally did execute him because he decided to end it. So the state really cooperated with Michael Ross in a suicide wish, and so he was executed. So if you look at the death penalty in practice, don't just look at what the theory of it is or what people talk about, with murders and so forth. You're really not. The people of Connecticut in practice are not keen to practice it. And so then when you come up with the fear, all the arguments of, well, it might deter other people, or it's too expensive to keep people with life without parole, and then you find out every argument fails, and then finally you come to the argument about the victims. And this I can see, the governor face to face with a family that has suffered so much, outrageous, unspeakable crimes of people being murdered. And almost like morally, because we know we haven't suffered that loss, like we owe it to the victim's family. This is the justice we owe them. and that lives have been taken, so a life ought to be lost, and that's why you got to keep the death penalty. And it's around, in a very, very concrete way, a particular case that has happened in Connecticut, which is horrible, which is unspeakable, and all of us think and shudder, wow, if that happened to my family, well, I know I would want the death penalty. But leaders in the community, like a governor and like the legislators have shown, have to think of more than a particular case. You have to think in the long run for the common good. What good is really done for victim families while multiplying the deaths and killing the one who killed their loved ones and continuing the whole cycle of violence? And that's how we need the wisdom of lawmakers and those who carry it out like governors. We need the wisdom to be able to see this is a hurting family, but let us think and let us look across the horizon and think of all the people who will be hurt, all those who have been hurt. Is imitating the behavior of the killer the way to really do justice or have healing in the society? Because the killer, the murderer, also has a mother, also has brothers and sisters, also has family. I've been in the killing chamber in Texas, where there are 3 witnessing chambers, where the state's witnesses are behind a one-way glass in one chamber, the victim's family is in another, and the other where the mother of the one being killed stands there and puts her hand against that glass and watches as her child is killed by the state. Is this what Connecticut wants to do? I mean, you're a life state, and the fact that you've had it on the books and you haven't used it says really where the people of Connecticut are. So my urge is to the citizens of Connecticut to get to your governor. She has to hear from enough people that this is not what is for the life and the good of the whole state to keep carrying out, and for her to go against the wishes of the legislature, to be able to get justice for a family which in a recent murder, because she feels she owes it to that family to do. And they're tough issues, but you just notice what's happening around the country. The death penalty is in severe diminishment, even in states that have done the death penalty the longest. In Orleans Parish, in New Orleans, we haven't had a death penalty coming from there in 12 years. Texas, in Harris County, in Houston, Texas, there was no death penalty at all last year because more and more jurors who are just ordinary citizens like us, knowing that we have an alternative of life without parole, are choosing life. And it would be wonderful if Connecticut, now that the legislators have chosen life, that the governor can be one with the will of the people, and this thrust to move away from death as a solution for trying to solve our social problems or to try to heal those who have been hurt.
Thank
So
you,
I
sir.
too add my voice to the governor, but the governor doesn't need the voice of the nun from Louisiana who happens to be in Iowa for this press conference. Most of all is to hear from the citizens of Connecticut to tell her to choose life.
Thank you, sister. We greatly appreciate you being here with us.
Folks, this is Randy Steidel. He came here by plane, train, and automobile to be with you today. I had the opportunity to speak with Randy prior to the press conference today, and I'm going to let you talk. He's going to talk, and you can ask him any question. But I want you to understand something. This gentleman here was wrongfully accused of a double homicide and literally went from his home to death row in 97 days. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced in 97 days for a crime he did not commit. Can mistakes happen? Here's one. Actual innocence. A man on death row. 5 years ago to the day, Randy walked out of prison. He calls it his second birthday. Randy.
Thank you. Cruz, 17 years ago. Over 17 years in prison, 12 on death row for a crime I did not commit. I was convicted in 1987 of murdering a young newlywed couple in downstate Paris, Illinois, even though I had a corroborated alibi, which remains corroborated to this very day. No physical or forensic evidence tied me to the crime. Yet, in 97 days, I went from the comforts of my home and my children to death row. That was a journey that took over 17 and a half years. All my appeals in state court failed. It was an exercise in futility. It wasn't until I got to a federal judge that finally a federal judge read the record for the very first time and granted all 17 issues of my federal habeas corpus petition. It was unheard of. And I gave the state 120 days to either try me or release me. And I walked out 5 years ago today into the arms of my family and my children. But that being said, I want to say that the death penalty in this country, I'm not an anomaly. There's 133 of us total that have sat on death rows across this country. 133. I was the 123rd just 5 years ago. There's been 10 since me. Now, that's not a system that's working. That is not a system that is working. How can this country have a system in place with an error rate? There's over 3,300 people sat on death row in this country. And yet we had over 133 that have been exonerated. And 10 in the last 5 years. And God only knows how many were not as fortunate. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. That's why I speak, because of those that have a voice to speak with anymore. I want you to know that the death penalty in the state of Illinois, I was one of 19 exonerees, being the 18th just 5 years ago, and just last month there was the 19th in Illinois, out of 160. That's an error rate better than 9%. But yet, Illinois put a moratorium in place. They did a 3-year study. They enacted 80 reforms. But yet, after those 80 reforms were enacted, they said they still cannot guarantee executing an innocent person. So Illinois was the first state to put a moratorium in place. And after a study and 80 reforms, cannot guarantee an innocent man won't be executed. What are we doing? We are in the company with Afghanistan, China, and several other countries that kill more of their people than any other country in the world. But yet, our politicians, our presidents stand up and say that we are the standard bearers for all humanities. Tell other countries how to treat each other. And yet we have a system in place that's killing innocent people, putting people on death row. I've often said that in 1999, my sentence was reduced to life without parole. I did 5.5 years of a life sentence. And I got to tell you, as harsh as death row was, I found living in the same size cage with another individual, some of them mentally ill, some of them you change cellmates every week, was far harsher. I watched 12 men walk to their death while I was on death row. I couldn't understand, not a one of them went with their head down. I'm sure all of them were guilty, maybe, all but one. But they didn't go kicking and screaming. I didn't understand that. They didn't fight. But after 2 years of doing life without parole in the Illinois prison system, I've come to understand why. After years of being in that cage 23 hours a day, they were being released. Because had the state of Illinois come to me, being 50 years old, doing life without parole, and said, Randy, we could end this for you if you want to hop up on this gurney, I'd have buckled myself on there a few times. As depressed and in despair as I was with the criminal justice system, the appeals process. That's how bad life without parole is. And I believe that this state, along with all the other states who have the death penalty, there's an alternative, and it's life without parole. because you're not going to have to worry about executing an innocent person. You can release an innocent person from prison, but you can't release him from the grave. I'm here standing here today, proof of that. The death penalty in this country is nothing more than revenge. Only 1% of convicted murderers get the death penalty. 1%. Murder is murder, isn't it? But yet, the death penalty is nothing but revenge. And revenge, we all know, is what? It's a hate crime. There's laws in this country against hate. That's why I travel with Witness to Innocence organization and speak to legislatures. Because people need to wake up. This is the United States of America. We're not Russia. We're not China, Afghanistan. But yet we're in the company of those people. That's why I asked Governor Rell to please sign the bill. You can take the lead with other states. Recently, New Mexico. I want to thank you for your time today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions any of you have.